Okay, welcome to the podcast, the COO and General Counsel for the McDougall Companies, the principal of Title I and partner at the McClendon law firm, Mr. Mont McClendon.
I'm glad you said Mont. If you said Mr. McClendon, I would have referred you to my father.
Montgomery. Welcome to the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
I have been excited about this one. I affectionately refer to you as the Dos Equis man.
Less facial hair, for sure.
Less facial hair for sure. But, nevertheless, you're an onion with so many layers. And one of them...
I hope to not make you cry.
Nah, don't do that. One of the layers, Mr. Marathon. Tell me about that. So for our listeners...
Sure.
Mont is running a marathon in all 50 states. And what state are you on? How many more do you have left?
So I have run a marathon in 48 states. I've run more than 48 marathons because I've repeated Chicago, because Chicago's awesome. I paused because there's a club you can join, 50 States Marathon Club, and getting close to the end, I decided it was time to pay attention to it. And recently learned that the marathon that I ran in Rhode Island doesn't count because it was marked short. So I had scheduled my last two marathons. I will be squeezing a marathon in Rhode Island back into that schedule before I finish in January of next year.
Okay. And the finale is Hawaii. Okay. I had so many questions. Were you a runner? Were you a runner growing up? Where did this come from?
No, like most people, running was the punishment that we did in other sports.
Right.
The longest runs that I had in my athletic career, which ended in high school, were training runs before and after wrestling practice. It was get out there and, do X miles or whatever. So no, it was not a thing, and I had always done gym work, after starting my career and trying to, keep your body healthy, keep your mind healthy. Spent a lot of years going to the gym and doing all of that sort of thing. Had some friends that had run long distances. My girlfriend, now my wife, had run a marathon. Had a buddy that had just finished a marathon, and I was 37 and said, you should get out and run. And I was like, well, that's a terrible thing to do. That's how you punish yourself. So I went out and ran a mile around Higginbotham Park here in Lubbock. And I thought I was going to die. I mean, it was terrible.
When
was this? Shape. This was I was 2009.
Okay.
And that made me mad because I thought I was in shape. And turns out I was not in endurance shape. So that turned into, well, let's train for a 5K, and then let's do a 10K, and then let's do a half. And then my personality took over, and 49 marathons later, I'm closing in on finishing out my states.
Okay. When did you start? Because this always blows my mind. When did you start the 50 state journey? Because it hasn't been that long.
No. So ran my first marathon, Austin, in 2010. And then for several years, was running with a group of folks here in town, really good runners community in West Texas. Running with a group of folks from a wide variety of backgrounds, and some of them were really fast. And I thought, well, I should try to get fast. Let's do the Boston thing or whatever. Not built for that. The skinny guy in wind shorts up front is the guy who's built for that. But I did find out that, I did have durability and endurance. I spent 5 years running 1 or 2 a year, trying to run them quickly. My fastest marathon was my third marathon, and it's been downhill ever since. But about 5 or 6 years into that, so into 16, read an article in the journal about, if you're not trying to win and you're not trying to run really fast, there's really not a physical limitation on needing to only run 1 or 2 in a year. Like you're probably, if you've built the endurance and the durability, you could do more than that. And I said, okay, well, let's do more than that. So I'll run 3 in 3 months. And if I'm going to do that, I might as well, travel around. So I ran 3 in 3 months, got to join Marathon Maniacs, which is a club that for people who run marathons a bunch.
Who are maniacs?
Yeah. And a lot of very experienced marathoners. And then I got my membership, and it was a bronze membership. And I was like, bronze? What's bronze? And then did a little more research, figured out that I could run 6 in 6 months and be a silver member, or I could run 9 in a year and be an iridium member. And iridium sounded way cooler than bronze. So I ran 9 marathons in a year shortly thereafter. And since then, it's been anywhere from 5 to 9 a year.
Okay.
With the exception of the almost 2 years I took off for a non-running related leg injury.
Tearing the ACL,
skiing related,
like a 16-year-old.
Yeah, you might as well. I mean, you got to use your body, right?
God gave us bodies. Before we get off the running thing, how do you build durability? Because that's one thing. I've run one marathon, and it was like from couch to marathon in like 5 months, which is dumb. But
it's hard.
It's hard. It's hard on your body. And so how do you build in that durability? Because I always hear people that run forever, their knees are terrible. And so how do you avoid that?
Well, the easy answer to that is avoid the mistake that most people make as they get into it. Most people's experience of running is, recess or, the sort of free running you do as a child, or the sort of purpose-driven running you do in an athletic career. And you're running for a different purpose in that regard. So most people think, well, if I'm running, I need to be panting. I need to be heart pounding. And, it's just physics, to double the speed, you square the energy. And so everything hits harder the faster you go, right? So if your intention is not to score the touchdown or win Red Rover or whatever, but to run a long distance, a long way, you probably need to slow down. If you can't hold a conversation while you're running too fast for the majority of your miles, right? 70% of your running should be below 70% of your max heart rate. Lots of different ways to square that. But the true answer to building endurance is to do it a lot, right? Mm-hmm. And the way that you build the durability to do it a lot is to not tear yourself up doing it, right? Mm-hmm. So slow down. You're not going to win. The skinny guy in wind shorts is going to win.
I know. It's some of like the vanity, times and things like that.
It's 26.2 miles.
It's a long time.
It's an inherent challenge, right?
Right.
So let that be the challenge, and then get to a place where you can, if you enjoy it, if there are ancillary benefits to doing it, and it doesn't have to be running, it could be cycling, it could be walking, it could be whatever it is. If there's ancillary benefits to doing it, you got to commit to doing it in a way that you're going to get the most of those benefits. And that's by doing it and continuing to do it. But, if there's an element of it, of wanting to face a challenge, and 26.2 miles is a challenge, let that be the challenge, right?
Fine.
And you can beat your last time, or you can not beat your last time. But, the thing about a marathon in particular is it's so dependent on the day. Mm-hmm. And most people who do the couch to 5K to half marathon to marathon thing put so much on the day, not realizing that it's a random day on the calendar, usually in the fall. And, maybe they've got a cold. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's cold. Maybe it's really hot. Maybe you're traveling and you didn't eat the things you normally eat. And,
There's so many variables.
Yeah. So if you're going to pin it all on one day, there's lots of ways to get tripped up.
Yep.
And also it's really hard.
It is.
I've never been to the end of a marathon and thought that was a completely sensible thing to do. But I've also never finished one and thought that's my last one.
All right. Marathon Maniac. New title. Okay, you mentioned how your personality took over, and you do have a unique personality. Maybe some personality flaws mixed in there.
That's charitable. I appreciate that.
And one of them is your alma mater, UT.
Yes,
that it's a part of your personality. Whether
I am a Longhorn. I can't help it.
Okay, so what made you choose UT? What was that story? Did your entire family go there? What's the story there? Because you're from Lubbock.
Yeah, I'm born and raised in Lubbock, West Texas kid. My parents weren't, but I am. So a couple of ways to answer that. One, the easy answer is if I count up the degrees from the University of Texas in my immediate family going up 2 generations and down 1, easily surpass a dozen, right? So a lot of us have gone through. I was became the youngest of 5 children in my family. We have just in my sibling group. I think we have 6 degrees from the University of Texas. I was the, youngest of 5. 4 of us went to UT. The other way to say it was, I think my parents, because they weren't from West Texas and had gone to UT, both of them, my dad undergrad in law school, my mom undergrad, and part of her master's program, they came from a different part of the state. They were mindful of the benefits of seeing and being exposed and mingling with people from all over the state. And I think they thought the chances of any of us ending up in Lubbock were increased if we left Lubbock for a while. And they were right? So my brother and I both ended up back in Lubbock very happily. Both of us returned really happily to be here. And I think part of the joy of being back was having been away and experienced something different. I guess the last way to answer that question is that in a lot of ways, Austin, when I went, and UT in particular, when I went, is very analogous to what Texas Tech is now.
Okay.
Right. So the entrance requirements were roughly similar back then to what, it is to get into tech now. The experience you're going to have as a student, as far as what your peer group is like, was very similar. I mean, the plurality of kids at Texas Tech now are not West Texas kids. You're not going there to meet the nicest person from Kermit or, or Dalhart. You're likely to have a roommate from the Metroplex or Houston or San Antonio or wherever. You're going to meet kids from all over the state at Texas Tech the way UT, which was less that way, when I went to school in the early 90s. But, it was a great way to meet kids from all over. And then, ultimately, however you might feel about our sports ball teams or our fan base, it's a good education. I mean, it's a really good school, particularly in particular programs. And then, I was the youngest of 4 through that program. They taught me all the tricks of the trades to get through. And I graduated undergrad in 3 years, wasn't ready to come home. And so I stayed in Austin for law school.
Law school.
Yeah.
Law school. That's where I was getting. I was like, what? And so your undergrad was?
So I got a degree in government with a minor in economics.
Okay. In 3 years, and then law school.
Straight into UT Law School.
Okay. Where did you start? So beginning of the law career, what did you do after that? I don't know this.
So, I had worked, I was always one of the people that was going to do better if I was busy. So I worked during undergrad, several jobs. There was a period of time where I thought that elected leadership was something that was really, really appealing. I worked as a Senate page for a while, kind of see how the sausage was made. I worked in the home office, the U.S. Senator in Austin for a while doing constituent stuff, got enough exposure to that part of it to realize that I really love the policy side of stuff, but there's a lot mixed up in those elected official jobs that I don't find appealing. The campaigning and those sorts of things, it doesn't appeal to me. I like the wonky stuff. I'm not a great shaker of hands, I suppose. Law school was always kind of in the cards for me. They weren't really hiring political scientists when I was getting out. And it was, that was the early 90s. It wasn't the greatest economy. And I had gone to undergraduate and finished undergraduate relatively quickly, always expecting to go get a graduate degree in law. Son of a lawyer. Don't know that I really thought it through beyond, I liked what he did. I liked the concept of being, how you still could practice law, show up and try the case and those sorts of things. But, my first jobs in the law were clerking for a firm that did bad faith insurance defense. I had no intentions of coming back to Lubbock. I was working towards a job in the appellate division of one of the prosecutorial offices in Austin. And then Dad called, and my father practiced law here in Lubbock since 1965, called and said, I need some help at home in the business. And I was like, how do you pass up a chance to come practice law with your dad?
Yeah.
So that was, I made it back to Lubbock.
That's what brought you back. I knew your brother was at least trained in law pretty heavily.
Yeah. My brother is, so I've got a brother that's a lawyer who serves as a state district judge and a sister who is a lawyer who had a career in the public sector of the law, worked at Health and Human Services after working in the General Counsel's office at Texas Tech after doing a brief stint in private practice, and really got to understand the sort of interface of law and healthcare, and now did some consulting outside of that. But the funny thing is that all three of us with law degrees practiced law for a time, and none of us practice law day to day now.
What a family of high achievers. Jeez. Okay. So this is a business podcast, and might be wondering why we have the lawyer on.
Yeah, with the running shoes.
Yeah, yep, on the mic. You're also a entrepreneur, and have started and grown several businesses. And so maybe give a high level view of what does your career look like today? Because you mentioned you're not practicing law day to day. And so what does your day to day look like now?
Yeah, I'll say that I won't practice law day to day, and like probably the common conception of what that looks like. I'm not spending my time in a firm consulting with clients. My career in the law, practiced law with my dad for 20 years. By the time I joined his practice, it had sort of concentrated around business and real estate transactions and litigation. So, having to do with dirt and money, right? So most of our practice was dealing with people in that business space. Although I, handled all kinds of things. I handled adoptions, and I handled divorces, and I handled some criminal matters when I was asked to. But most of my practice was business people dealing with meaningful business decisions as it interfaced with the law, whether it was a transaction or whether it was a litigation issue. And so I loved that part of the practice because I got to see and get under the hood with a lot of different kinds of businesses. I had all kinds of business clients. The biggest bulk of my work was real estate related. The biggest client, never the majority of my time in private practice, but the biggest client was a local real estate firm here in town, and really, really love and respect them as people. 8 years ago, they had a need for another executive in their company. And we mentioned McDougall Companies at the top, so it's no surprise it's the McDougall companies that for whom I work now.
Yeah.
But they had a need for an executive, and it was, Delbert, who founded that company, was my dad's client for 50 years.
Oh, man.
Mark, who runs that company now, and Delbert and Carolyn, and they were my clients for 20 years. And so when they said, come over and join us, I thought, why don't I do that? And it was such a difference to go from being in a position where clients come to you and say, we have this problem, or we have this solution, we need to effectuate it. We need to get from A to B, to saying, what do you want to do? Which was really a fun and a nice change of pace after 20 years practicing law.
Yeah.
So, I get to bring that experience into what we do as a company. As you mentioned, we have other companies, including a title company, and, McDougall Companies is fairly diversified in what we're involved in, everything from hospitality to, with restaurants and hotels, pretty much every category of commercial real estate and residential real estate we are involved in some way. So it's still varied. And so, I never exactly know what problem is going to show up on my desk at any given day, but I know it'll be interesting, and it'll probably comport with the experience I bring to the job. So that's been fun.
Your political interest,
sure,
has been fascinating to watch, especially at the local level, just helping guide a lot of the future plans and future growth of Lubbock. And this is one thing that, as a business owner and entrepreneur, I never know what to do with this. Like, what do I do with politics? How much should I care? I hate my millennials don't watch the news. We have Twitter and Facebook or X, whatever. And so, speak into that a little bit for business owners. What role do politics and I obviously, local versus state versus federal is varies how much we should care, but for the average business owner, to talk about that, why should they care, or should they?
No, they should. You gave me the onion analogy, so let's give you some layers. There's lots of different ways to process that question. I think, at one level, you're familiar with the term working in your business versus working on your business.
Yep.
I would say working in your community versus working on your community.
Okay.
Right. So there's an element of the answer to this question, which is, things are going to be a particular way when it comes to governance. And politics is such a loaded term.
Right.
So let's take about terms of governance and policy. What the governmental entities that affect your life, what are they doing in affecting your life? And, I'll just tell you from the top, I'm a small little libertarian. Having worked in government, there's so many things that I think government ought not to do, right? But as a small little libertarian, I understand that, one, that's informed by the fact that I'm a Texan. And not only that, but a West Texan, right? Mm-hmm. We can get a lot done on our own out here. And Texas is going to be fine without a lot of layers of government over the top of that. And having traveled around, now 48 states, that's not true everywhere. So there's a bit of privilege in saying that. But where the ideology of government ought to lean out as much as possible starts to break down at morality and municipal issues, right? You can say you believe government shouldn't really do anything, but at some point that starts to get inconsistent with your moral code in regards to what people do to each other or what you do to your body, those sorts of things. And, at the end of the day on municipal issues, the toilets need to flush. They need to go somewhere. The tap needs to turn on. You need to have roads to just get around. The economy needs a certain amount of its infrastructure. Community needs a certain amount of infrastructure. So you're going to have to solve those issues. And the way we solve that is municipal government. So do you need to pay attention as a business person to what is going on in policy and governance? Absolutely. Right. I mean, think about just locally in your business, you're a builder at every level. You're a builder. Tariffs at a federal level affect your input costs. At a state level, what codes are adopted and what they mean, or what requirements are placed around how you organize and operate your business, or what you pay your staff, or all those sorts of things, are all things that are being made as decisions of policy at the state level. At a local level, you're going to have to interface with the local government in regards to just basic building regulations. You're going to have to pull a permit. You're going to have to get inspections. You're going to have to meet certain requirements as to where you can build and whether you can build. So every part of that, every layer of regulation in that regard is the effectuation of a policy decision at some point. And so what I would say is, as a business person, you need to pay attention to where it is you're touching up against governance, right? Because your involvement, your knowledge of that can keep you out of making a bad decision that costs you, could eat all your margin.
Right.
Staying between the lines might be the easiest way, but there might be times when the lines are just in the wrong place. There's a policy decision that is being effectuated in a particular way that doesn't make sense for how you think the world ought to be. And you should have the ability to go talk that through with someone, right?
Who can effectively make a change.
Yeah. Who can make a change. And so you got to be able to advocate for your business at every level. And so that's when the advocacy starts to where we get into politics, right? Mm-hmm. You can pick an RD, or you can pick a liberal or a conservative or whatever, but understanding your ideology, understanding the ideology of the person you're talking to, and understanding just the basic job of the person you're talking to can really be the difference between being a helpful voice in advocacy or just a loud clanging gong.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's definitely, whether you're going to a P&Z or a city council meeting, there's people that are there just to hear their voice and clang a gong and demand something without understanding the bigger picture.
Yeah, or even understanding the decision criteria of the people that they're advocating to.
Yeah.
Right. You know, we all, those of us that spend a lot of time at those sort of hearings, city council and P&Z and ZBA and UDHPC and all of the alphabet soup of local governments have an internal bingo card of bad arguments. I just can't wait until somebody says it's for the kids, because I know I've just covered my center, my bingo card.
So the advocacy piece, I feel like a good understanding of that isn't taught in school.
Oh no. Yeah.
Meaning, whatever professional organization, I'll take the apartment association as an example. There's a lot of bad policy, or I'll take bad off it. There's a lot of policy that is proposed that no one can know everything. No one can know how every industry is going to be affected by a piece of policy. And I think advocacy is developing relationships with those who are pushing forward policy, so that when that proposed legislation, piece of policy is being introduced, that you can call and say, hey, this is great for us. This is how that's going to help us. Or, hey, that's really bad for us. And I know, one of the roles of government is to help provide affordable housing, in some form, or encourage that. And this is why this new policy is going to hurt that, and give an explanation. And I think that's what advocacy is developing a understanding, a respect, a relationship with those policymakers, so that you can defend your industry from things that are going to hurt you from delivering goods or services to the public.
Right. So, I mean, the least compelling argument one can make is because I said so. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And not far,
my mom told me that all the time.
Not far behind that is because it's going to cost me money if your audience perceives you as doing just fine.
Yep.
And even if that's not really their place to make that decision, it's not compelling. Right. So the toolkit of advocating for where your position really needs to be bound in understanding the ramifications of a policy proposal or the application of an existing policy, and what it means. What are the knock-on effects of what you're trying to do? So many policy proposals that we see, and I'll use the multifamily industry as an example, are trying to solve for a problem that's pretty obvious. We had a supply problem, mm-hmm. Right?
And for the listeners, if maybe it's not common knowledge that the more supply of multifamily or housing, the bigger the supply, the cheaper it is.
Yeah, I'm not going to shock any of your listeners when I say I'm a market capitalist, but
heresy.
So let's just use Lubbock as an example,
sure,
and because Lubbock is reflective of the state as a whole and the nation, and by extension, and really you can talk about most developed economies in the same way. We have had policies that have intended to preserve or protect or sustain particular paradigms about how we live that have meant that you can build less housing, mm-hmm. Right? If we can't build there because you block a view, or because it doesn't meet some transportation availability criteria, or whatever, then we have less housing. Lubbock, because of macroeconomic conditions more than anything, because we've gotten better about our regulatory environment, although I think there are folks at home builders that would like to see additional changes, and I can't tell you that they're wrong. Lubbock is underbuilt based on the city's projections of organic growth, just household formation, by about 2,000 houses over the last 3 years.
Okay.
And so the price that you pay, the median home price in Lubbock, has gone up more than the average annual salary of a person living and working in Lubbock in the same period of time. Mm. So the delta on buying an average house in Lubbock has increased more than you're going to make in a year. That is a direct consequence of supply and demand, right?
Yeah.
And so back to where we started with this, there are so many policy considerations related to housing, or related to construction standards, or related to so many different things. that are trying to solve for a condition that has been created in the market, usually by a regulatory regime that's out of date or no longer serving its purpose, or just an internal sort of view of the world, model of the world among policymakers that just hasn't quite updated to the current circumstance, right? I think we can everybody in the sound of my voice is going to understand that even if you can't sit down and make a list of the difference between the generational aspects of our culture right now, that there are some.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I even think about like the development code of like in the 60s, the number of parking spaces and what setbacks were and what was like in vogue then to build.
The definition of a family.
Yeah.
Albert.
has changed. And so that needs to change, with what is the demand right now? Like policy needs to change to allow what people want to a degree. Okay, I want to pivot a little bit. So maybe it's no surprise to the listener that I am of the persuasion that I believe the IRS tax code was written to encourage the private sector to do certain things that provide goods and services for the overall public. A good portion of that is written so the government's saying, hey, we aren't equipped to do this effectively, efficiently. You private sector, I want you to provide housing or healthcare or energy or whatever in this way to this population, and I'm going to incentivize that with certain tax benefits.
Yeah. I mean, the tax code, at a very high level, tax policy is carrots and sticks.
Yep. Yeah. What kind of dog do you get if you beat it rather than if you give it a treat? And how responsive and how deep is the relationship to go through whatever challenges? And so I use that illustration, and also I think of, and we mentioned this before we started recording, of the Carnegies and the Rockefellers of the turn of the century that really used a lot of government incentives, government plans, whether it was the railroad, that they built their organizations on the backs of government incentives with the railroad. And so maybe for business owners, whether it's the tax code or whether it's a city plan or a government plan, how have you been able to use that in your career, and how would a business owner go about figuring out how to incorporate that with their business?
Yeah. So let's tie that back to your last question too, about why you should pay attention and why you should be involved. There's a theme in this podcast that I've picked up, that is there are forces at work in the world that will affect your business, whether you pay attention to them or not. Right? Because there are means by which capital markets are going to value your business, going back to your conversation with Tanner Noble. There are inherent structures in the law that deal with the passing of assets when someone dies, going back to your conversation with Austin Ramsey. There are decisions being made about your business that exist and are true whether or not you're paying attention to them. So let's loop that theme into how you stay between the lines when you operate your business. So, the easy ways are making decisions about to the extent to what you want to limit liability, whether by corporate structure, by insurance, by staying in particular markets or staying out of particular activities, all of those sorts of things. All of those are an understanding of where governance touches your business. But, how do you take it? How do you find the power up button? So some of that's resources, right? And I'm assuming anybody that's doing well enough to be able to download podcasts can probably do some basic internet research. But, local resources, Small Business Development Center, Chamber of Commerce, Business Development Office at the city, LEDA, Lubbock Economic Development Alliance, lots of the sort of local facing business or economic development arms focused on West Texas are really happy to help you in your business. Now, it might not, depending on the type of your business, what's available to you may be applicable, may not yet be applicable. Maybe you're already aged past some of the things that they could do. You're going strong and those sorts of things. But it is worth having a conversation about whether or not the next, if you're thinking about your next step, if you're thinking, okay, I've achieved a particular status quo, but I need to punch through, or I would like to punch through, or I would like to grow, or I would like to take it in another direction, there are generally opportunities within those entities I just mentioned to help you think through and maybe help you get through that next step, because a rising tide raises all boats. And in West Texas, we're a community that will, generally speaking, reach out to help you. We're going to want you to meet certain criteria, and we're going to want you to follow the rules.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But we don't mind raising the barn together. So there are incentive programs depending on what you're doing, grant programs through Lubbock, LEDA and Market Lubbock. There's access to affordable credit or capital through SBA and through a bunch of the Small Business Development Center and those sorts of things. There are just, even if it just comes down to marketing, there are arms of the city and the county government and the chamber that cannot wait to be the megaphone for you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, difference between working in your business and working on your business, it's working in your community, working on your community.
Yeah.
Be involved in those things, have those conversations, and then you can make, you make an informed decision as to whether or not that's something you want to go do. I didn't tell you there are incentive programs that you can take a good hard look at and say, no, thank you. Nah. And that's a reasonable decision sometimes, but that's a different mindset of saying no because you never knew.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's so many business owners that I've known that kind of turn their nose up at, getting involved in the chamber or different things like that are kind of, pseudo local governance bodies, but that I'll pick on the chamber a little bit.
They can take it.
We have a great chamber. Like it's won multiple national awards. They do a really good job of connecting you to the business community. And that's one of the things being in West Texas, the community that is here, it's a big small town, and you go to enough of those events and you kind of see the same, groups of people that once you get to know them, there's a lot of things that relationships drive everything.
Right,
we talked about that, whether it's policy or whatever, that some of those pseudo government agencies can help facilitate that. And that's low hanging fruit, and that's pretty cheap.
Yeah.
To get involved in.
Well, and even if it's not the chamber, whether, maybe it is a professional association,
Mm-hmm.
maybe it is an industry group. It is something relative to others in your space facing or having faced the same problems or the same issues, or presenting enough critical mass for vendors to come give you a specialized kind of time that you're not going to get.
Yeah.
That you may not, there may be somebody out there with the thing that solves your problem that you will meet at that kind of function. And otherwise you're just waiting for them to come darken your door or somehow for their spam to make it through your filter. But if you get out there and engage and at least begin to have the conversations and at least understand what people are paying attention to, then you've already cleared the first hurdle on being involved in the governance of your business.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah. And so much of that is that continuous, constant, never ending improvement. Is business owners that have that mindset, over time, if they don't give up, eventually you're going to win. And yeah, it's no secret, you and I are pretty heavily involved in the apartment association, which is for rental housing.
It was a secret for me, but you just outed me.
Sorry, outed you.
It's all right.
Which is a professional organization for rental housing. in, Lubbock and the surrounding area. And you're right. When we can get vendors there that know what we do and what we're trying to do, all of a sudden they're way more valuable to all of us because they can come and operate within, a certain understanding that limits liability for us, makes them more valuable. They kind of understand our operations. And that's
well, and your time is not infinite, right? And so there is value in understanding where people's focus and attention is when they're working on a similar problem set as you, right?
Good point.
Even if the most valuable thing you get from having paid attention to what they're paying attention to is learning that they're making a mistake, comparative advantage.
Yeah.
But still, if everyone's afraid of a monster in the corner and you don't know that there's a corner and you don't know that you're a monster, doesn't mean you're at any less danger.
Right.
So it's useful. So signaling.
Would your practical advice for business owners, would it be, as far as how the political sphere and local government affects your business, is to first start with a professional organization?
I think that is a very good place to start to understand whether and how it affects your business, because hopefully they're paying attention. Right. And my experience with the professional associations in town, and I'm trying to think, I can think of a dozen that I've been in or around through my career. They're paying attention. So I think it's a great way to get that sort of initial introduction to what's going on at City Hall. It's very hard to make decisions about local elected races based on, door hangers and door knockers and, oh my gosh, ads, that sort of thing. There's just not good information. And in a community like West Texas, you can meet the person.
Right.
You can have a conversation with that person. And if you think that person might be the key to helping you solve a problem where you're rubbing up against local governance, regulation, or whatever, then it's worth having that conversation. Or if you think that person might be awful for your business, it's worth meeting that person and telling them.
Yeah.
I mean, they put their name on the ballot. They should be able to understand your issue.
Well, that's one thing that's been illuminated over the last couple of years is like they need to so often. I mean, social media is noise. Like they're not reading all of that stuff. And so if you have a face-to-face, I mean, obviously being cordial and respectful,
right,
but explaining issues to a policy when you don't agree, it is valuable because they gain some understanding. And then maybe if you're respectful and kind, when a policy comes across their desk, you might get a call.
Yeah. So the lawyer's creed says we should disagree without being disagreeable. That's a hard thing to do, but it's a very valuable skill. And I will say, I've already told you, don't say because I said so. Don't say because, then I can't go to Hawaii. I think if you start from a place of, I am trying, my top concern is taking the care of the people who have joined me in this business. I've got promises to keep, and it's important to me to keep those promises. And if in the course of doing that, I can better take care of myself, I can better take care of my family, I can build something of use to the community, I can solve a problem, I can grow a business, but I'm having this problem. If you can come to a local elected official or a decision maker at the city or county or even state level and say, this is what I'm up against. Here's what I'm trying to do. This is where I'm hanging up. What can be done? And if they say, well, the ordinance is written this way, then be willing to say, what would a better ordinance look like? And if you can supply that answer in some way and back it up with the knock-on effects of that, or why it should be a different way and why that would solve the problem for more than just me or just you, then that is more compelling, right? But
sound like an attorney.
But don't believe for a second that, and you almost got here with with the lawyer on the last conversation. When we write wills and business plans, we don't etch them in stone or sign them with blood.
Mm-hmm.
Ordinances, laws, all of those things, all of those policy considerations are the same way. They may be changed, right? Up to and including the United States Constitution. Now, the level and degree of effort required to change things increases as you climb the ladder from city to state to federal, because the legislative process is a process designed to say no to a lot of things. But you can change a bad statute. You can change a bad ordinance. You can have a conversation with a person at the city whose job is to effectuate a statute or a policy, an ordinance, and say, I read this differently. Mm-hmm. Can we talk about maybe there's another way to interpret this? And maybe you get done what you need to get done, but you got to be able to have those conversations. And being able to have those conversations, not as a complete stranger and not as a kook voice on the interweb and through social media, is invaluable. Right? Because you can change your environment when it comes to where your business bumps up against governance. You can.
And speaking of trying to get things done, what are you working on now? What are you trying to get done? What are you excited about right now?
Well, the bulk of my business is in real estate, and it's been a challenge in commercial real estate. Just the macroeconomic environment has been a challenge. Mark McDougall, my business partner, and I, we work in existing assets, in redevelopment, and in greenfield development as well. So we would really like to see the city continue to grow. We have a greenfield development in the northwest part of town that I think could be a really great thing, because it is relatively close to some of the things that make Lubbock. So, the hospitals, the university downtown, those sorts of things. I'm a big believer in downtown because I've done the math, right? I can tell you that you're already at a value per acre multiple of 2x or 3x in downtown. And that's with downtown in its current state. And you're welcome to have feelings about downtown in its current state. But if you do, what I think those feelings tell you is that there's room for improvement. And if we achieve improvement in an already value dense environment, we get a return or an investment and returns on our tax base and everything else. Have added, not I, but the city has added $90+ million in permittable improvements in downtown in the last half decade. And maybe you feel like you haven't seen that yet, but that's $90 more billion on the tax base, right? And that's half of a brand new greenfield neighborhood, right? And no additional roads, no additional sewer, no additional water infrastructure, no anything. So we can build. And plus, I think, it's nice to have a center, a beating heart of your community, right? I travel around, I go to all these states and run all these places, and I never think, man, I cannot wait to get to state X and visit the suburbs.
Yes.
Right? Yes. I want to go, at the traditional historical center of the reason that community is there, and that very often is downtown. And I don't love the idea that we would take the historical sort of center of gravity of our community and neglect it.
Yeah.
Right.
And it has been. Okay. You said something I want to rephrase and see if I understood correctly. So when you talk about downtown and developing downtown, that because of the density of the projects that you would develop, basically you're going vertical more than you would be elsewhere to a degree, that you aren't having to add more infrastructure in the same way, whether it be roads or sewer lines or water lines or whatever, that basically those roads are being funded by tax dollars. And so if we can develop downtown, the taxes that the city will generate off of those developments are a better return on investment than all the infrastructure it would take to continue the urban sprawl and growing neighborhoods to the south and southwest. That it's just It's kind of low hanging fruit, right?
Well, you get a different return on your investment, right? And downtown is not a solution for everyone, right? There are really wonderful communities and neighborhoods all over our city,
right?
And I think that's true of wherever anybody might listen. But the cheapest infrastructure that any city will ever have is the infrastructure they already have.
Yep.
They don't have to go get right away. They don't have to engineer it. They don't have to design it. They don't have to do any of those things. They have to care and feed it.
Yep.
Right. And so if you can spur investment near existing infrastructure, the return on that investment to the city's tax base, their general funds, the things that they can spend without considerations for particular buckets of spend, fund accounting like we do in government, then you have more money for policing. You have more money for community investment. You have more money for new infrastructure on the periphery.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
If I can get $1 invested downtown, the likelihood is the margin on that dollar for the community's finances at a government level are much greater than $1 spent turning a cotton field into a neighborhood.
That's fascinating and takes time to understand that. To tell that story, you can't do it in a 30-second ad.
And I'm happy to turn cotton fields into neighborhoods. Don't get me wrong.
Right.
But I just, it's not one or the other, right? There's a place for both in a growing community. But when you emphasize one over the other or at the cost of the other, then the return on investment needs to be a part of that conversation, right?
Yeah. And as a citizen of Lubbock, if I'm thinking about the taxes that I'm paying and that continuing to go up, maybe that wouldn't go up to the same degree if we went after some of this low-hanging fruit downtown where we can generate more tax dollars with less expense.
Right.
And that's business 101.
It's business 101.
I love it.
It's just math.
It's just math. Okay. I think it's time for fire round.
All right.
Mont, what is your favorite movie? I don't know this. This could go anywhere.
Yeah, this could go anywhere. It's hard to pick a single favorite, right? But I would say that the movie that I get something out of every time I rewatch it is Princess Bride. It's just fantastic. Andre the Giant's in it. What else could you want?
Okay. That doesn't surprise me. It shouldn't have. All right. What is your favorite book?
Does anyone say anything other than the Bible?
What,
an
other than the Bible.
Okay.
I would have to preface that sometimes.
So let's use the same criteria. The book that I can return to time and time again and get something out of it every time that I do is Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut.
What?
Cat's Cradle by Kurt Vonnegut. It's not a long book.
I've never read that.
It's got a lot of layers.
Okay. What is like, what genre? What's like
it's Kurt Vonnegut. So it's, arguably it's got a speculative fiction or a science fiction aspect to it.
Okay.
But it was written, middle of last century and has a little bit of that vibe. But it also, unlike Slaughterhouse-Five, is less of a post-war feel or Play Your Piano, one of those other ones, or that sort of thing. So it was sort of him leaning into the very beginning of the 70s and probably what was to come in the 80s as far as the overall feel of the thing.
What's it about?
Oh man,
don't give it away.
It's Vonnegut. So it's mainly the absurdity of the characters and the situations, but the nut of the book is a formulation for the crystalline structure of water, right? So ice, right? So this wacky scientist decides, based on his fascination with how cannonballs are stacked up on courthouse lawns, that the molecules in water could be arranged just so that they create a crystalline structure at room temperature.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
So what does room temperature water mean for
water?
For the world if it's not controlled? It means all the water turns to ice.
Okay.
You asked.
I asked.
It's not a long book, and it's funny.
Okay.
In a fatalistic sort of absurdist way.
I've never heard. Okay.
It's hilarious. I'll get you a copy.
If you could have lunch with one entrepreneur, dead or alive, who would it be?
So I'm going to stretch the definition of entrepreneur a little bit and say that my answer would be John Law, who was,
John Law.
Yeah.
Johnny Law.
John Law.
Okay.
Who was a Age of Enlightenment financier who more or less invented the underpinnings of modern central banking and finance. I picked him partially because that period of time when we were inventing the modern world and modern global commerce and all of those, and money and all of those things is an interesting period of time to me. I mean, we also where we invented calculus and all of those sorts of things. But he in particular would be fun to sit down and have dinner with, because he was an absolute scoundrel.
Okay. I was going to ask, is he a Rothschild or a Vanderbilt?
No, he made his way into creating the world's first central bank in France because of relationships he made while gambling.
Okay.
And he lived through a mercantile bubble and did all of the things. He was really an interesting guy. So John, I would go with Mr. Law.
Yeah, you are the Dos Equis, man. Okay. And then last one, you said you didn't have a good answer on this one, so we'll go with the opposite. What is really the best piece of business advice that you've heard that you try to live by?
The best business advice I ever got was find someone who likes to do what you don't like to do and pay them to do it, right? We are an independent and self-reliant community of people in entrepreneurship and in West Texas. And so there's a default mindset of I'm smart enough. This is not rocket surgery. I can do this thing. The question you ought to be asking is, should you be doing that thing, right? Am I capable of doing my own taxes? Yes. Should I do my taxes? No, I should not. I should pay my CPA, who I think is a wonderful person and deserves to make a living. I should pay him to do that because I hate it. Similarly with a lot of things, like I don't need to be down doing book entry. I don't need to be doing a lot of the things in my business or businesses that other people will do for a reasonable cost, much better and much faster and much happier than I am. So we can increase the net happiness in our business by letting people who like to do the things you don't like to do them. That was, it's hard to let go.
It is.
But the opportunity cost of what you can do with that time by not spending time doing something you hate on something you love is a pretty big delta.
Yep. Make a much bigger impact.
Yeah.
All right, Mont, thank you. Thank you for being a guest. I enjoyed it. I
didn't know where we were going to go with this, so I'm really glad you led me through it.
You didn't disappoint.
Right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, man.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that podcast. I hope you got a lot out of it and enjoyed that conversation. I know I did. If you want more where that came from, go ahead and click subscribe and keep coming back for the next one. And if you're a business owner and you feel stuck in your business and you feel stuck that you can't work on your business to grow your business to the next level, go ahead and go to our website, stagcoaching.com, and click in the upper right-hand corner for our free business assessment. In just a few questions, in just a few minutes, it can diagnose what's going on in your business, what's going right, what's going wrong, and what you can do about it. It's free, and it's on our website, stagcoaching.com. Thank you. We'll see you on the next one.